So let's move on from the first paragraph. If you get the first paragraph, it's worth spending 10 minutes talking about the first paragraph, because if you get that, and I don't think there's really anything that difficult about it, you're really set up for reading the rest of the book. So let's look what follows that immediately on page 43. And let's skip the next paragraph. There's a brief paragraph there that says, such a relation which relates to itself, a self. Okay, so such a relation which relates to itself, a self, that is a self. Something which relates to itself is a self. Such a relation which relates to itself, a self, must either have established itself or been established by something else. Now here we can see things really getting going. We exist. You and I, all of us, we exist. And Kierkegaard has characterized us as relations. This relation between the infinite and the finite, the temporal and the eternal, of freedom and necessity. We are these relations which relate to ourselves, which are self-conscious. So we exist, I guess, as everything exists. We exist in a certain peculiar way. We're conscious beings, which makes all the difference. But we exist, and Kierkegaard seems to be saying in what I just read, either we established ourselves or we were established by something else. And I think you can read, either we're just here as a result of an accident or chance, or we're just here as a result of evolutionary forces, chance, strange things that happened in the course of the development, blind development of the universe, and here we are. Or we were established by something else, by you know who. And I think that it's not a throwaway line there, what I just read. It's a very, very important moment in, not only in this book, but in anyone's life. That is, it really is an expression of a situation that we all find ourselves in sooner or later. That is, deciding whether or not God exists. Because whether you believe God exists or you don't believe God exists, it's not obvious that God exists, I guess. I mean, that is, you can live a whole wonderful life in a way, although ultimately Kierkegaard will say it's still a life of despair. You can live a whole complete life without believing in God, without having God anywhere in your life. That is possible. But you have to decide. You have to decide what kind of world you live in. If you live in a world where you establish yourself or where you just exist, that's one sort of world. If you live in a world where you were established, created by something else, you live in another world. And I think that ultimately the decision about what sort of world you live in is your decision. No one can make it for you, and no one can prove to you that one is better than another. You simply have to decide, by whatever means we do decide these huge metaphysical questions, whether God exists. That is, what sort of world you live in. That is, you have to decide, were you established by something else or were you established by yourself? That is, do you just exist? Because the implications of your choice are incredibly important. If the relation which relates to itself has been established by something else, then of course the relation is the third term. That is, in any relation there's three terms. Take the relation 2 is greater than 1. We've got three terms. We've got 2, we've got 1, and then we've got greater than. Okay, so in any relation we've got at least two things, and we've got the way that they're related, so there's going to be three terms. And he says the relation is the third term. But if we're relations that were established by something else, then there's more going on here than the three terms of the relation. If the relation which relates to itself has been established by something else, then of course the relation is the third term. But then this relation, the third term, is a relation which relates in turn to that which has established the whole relation. Which gives you a very, very important place to start thinking about how Kierkegaard conceives what it means to be a human person. If we were established by something else, well, of course we're still a relation which relates us to ourselves. But if we're established by something else, then we also relate to something beyond ourselves. That is, we're a relation which relates in turn to that which has established the whole relation. He continues, such a derived, established relation is the human self, a relation which relates to itself, and in relating to itself, relates to something else. Many things you could note there. What's really interesting is the way that Kierkegaard sets up this, well, either you were established by yourself or by something else, which is, I think, the same thing as saying either God doesn't exist and the universe is godless, or God does exist and the universe is filled with the presence of God. And right there, at the bottom of page 43, he says, well, of course, we're derived relation. That is, of course, we were established by something else. He makes no attempt to prove it. And maybe he's very wise. He just goes on. As if it's not really, let's not get bogged down in proving the existence of God. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what it's like to live in a world with God. Because he's not really concerned with the huge metaphysical controversy about God's existence. Let's just get down to what it's like to be a self, or an aspiring self, in a world where God is real. Such a derived, established relation is the human self, a relation which relates to itself, and in relating to itself, relates to something else. That is why there can be two forms of authentic despair. There's the big word of the book, despair. Comes out of nowhere. Apparently, because God exists, there can be two forms of despair. Whereas if God didn't exist, I guess there would only be the one form, whatever it is, of despair. But there's the big word, big concept, and in a way the one that we'll be struggling with for the rest of our reading of this book. Why is despair, the experience of despair, so closely wrapped up in Kierkegaard's mind with what it means to be an existing human person at all?